Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding a Mishnah Berurah Cheli Gimel, and Yirtz Hashem today we will be learning Daf Nun Zayin Amud Aleph. Our learning should be a schus for Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael Hanasunu Batzaru Ba'Shivya Ha'imdim Bein Bayam U'Bein Bayabasha Hamakoy Yerachem Aleihem V'Yitzim Yitzar L'Revacha Me'afel L'Oira Mishibur L'Geula Hashta Bagolo V'Zman Kariv and Emar Mein. Our learning should be a schus for Refuah Shalema for Tzvi ben Leah Miriam, and our learning should be a schus for Yisrael ben Rachel, Yonasan ben Michal, Yoel ben Michal. Rabbi Hashem should watch over them, together with the rest of all of our brothers and sisters that finds themselves in harm way. B'chol Makom Shehem. We are continuing to learn Hilchei Shabbos. We pick up today on Daf Nun Vav Amud Beis, 3 lines off the bottom, the words of the Ramah Hagah. This is in Siman Reish Ayin Vav Sif Gimel, in the midst of Sif Gimel by the Ramah Hagah. Now, I hope that we'll complete Daf Nun Zayin Amud Aleph and maybe finish this very, very complex Siman. For a proper understanding of the material, I think we do have to give a brief recap of some of the laws, some of the rules that we've established so far here in Siman Reish Ayin Vav. So Siman Reish Ayin Vav Sif Aleph started with one very basic rule, and that is, if an Eini Yehudi lights a ner, so he's performing a malacha daraisa of mavir, he's lighting a flame. If an Eini Yehudi lights a ner for a Yisrael on Shabbos, then the Yisrael is not allowed to get any hana from that ner. Not only is the Yisrael whom the ner was lit for not allowed to derive benefit from that ner, no Yisrael is allowed to derive benefit from that ner. Now, what's the reason for this? This is an Issa D'Rabbanan. What are the underpinnings of this Issa D'Rabbanan? So we know that there's an Issa D'Rabbanan of Amira La'akum. You are not allowed to ask an Eini Yehudi to perform malacha for you. What Chazal were afraid of was, if a Yid is going to see that when an Eini Yehudi does malacha for him, he's allowed to derive benefit from that malacha, then the natural next step is going to be that the Yisrael is going to ask an Eini Yehudi to do malacha for him on Shabbos. So again, if a Yid is going to see that if an Eini Yehudi lights a ner on Shabbos for him, for the Yid, then the Yid is allowed to use that ner, well then it's a natural progression that the Yid is going to go to the Eini Yehudi and actively ask him to light the ner for him. Now that would be a problem of Amira La'akum. So Chazal wa Masakid, they made an Issa D'Rabbanan, and they said, even if you did not ask the Eini Yehudi to light the ner, if the Eini Yehudi lit the ner for you, you're not allowed to get hana from that ner, nor is any other Yisrael allowed to get hana from that ner. Now the truth is that this brings up an interesting question. We're going to do a slight digression here for a moment, because I think it's a question that's going to bother everybody. Amir La'akum is an Issa D'Rabbanan. Now, I'm telling you now, the reason you're not allowed to be neneh from a ner that was lit by an Eini Yehudi on your behalf, even if you didn't ask him to do it, is because if we allow that, you're going to come to Amir La'akum. Now, that sounds suspiciously like a gzeira l'gzeira. It sounds like we're making an Issa D'Rabbanan to protect against the transgression of another Issa D'Rabbanan. Now, the rule is we never make a gzeira l'gzeira. So why isn't this a gzeira l'gzeira? The answer is that a gzeira l'gzeira is only when Chazal make one gzeira, and then they're afraid that, now people, if we allow such a scenario to happen, people might come to be over on our gzeira d'Rabbanan. So we need to make a second gzeira d'Rabbanan to protect our original gzeira d'Rabbanan. That would be a gzeira l'gzeira. That's not what's happening over here. Over here, it's all one gzeira, chada gzeiri. It's all one gzeira. When Chazal made the gzeira of Amir La'akum, and they said that you're not allowed to ask an Eini Yehudi to do malacha on your behalf, part of their gzeira was that when an Eini Yehudi does do malacha on the part of Yisrael, that malacha becomes aser b'hana. Okay, now, till now, we were speaking about a case where the Eini Yehudi lit the ner for the Yisrael. How about if that's not what happened? How about if an Eini Yehudi lit a ner for himself? So there's an Eina Yehudi sitting in a room. It's dark in the room. He wants to read a book. He lit an air. He puts it down on the coffee table, and he sits down and he's reading a book. Now you want to come in and you want to sit down next to him, and you want to be Marvis Hedra by the light of that nair. That's okay. The Eina Yehudi in this case did not light the nair for you. Again, the problem over here is if we tell you that you're allowed to have hana from the malacha that an Eina Yehudi did for you, then you might come to ask him to do malacha for you. But that's not what's happening over here. Over here, the Eina Yehudi did malacha for himself. It had nothing to do with you. When an Eina Yehudi does malacha for himself, you're allowed to get hana from that malacha, and so too any other yid is allowed to get hana from that malacha. The same thing applies. Let's say an Eina Yehudi did malacha for somebody that you're allowed to ask him to do malacha for. There are cases where there is no Isser of Amir Lakum. So, for example, you are allowed to ask an Eina Yehudi to do malacha for a chayla, for an ill individual, or for a katan, because we consider a katan to be similar to a chayla. So, if a yid who's a chayla is in a room and he needs the lights on, you're allowed to ask an Eina Yehudi to turn the light on for the benefit of the chayla. Okay, are you allowed to get hana from that light? The answer is yes. Why? Because again, the Issa D'Rabbanan is inappropriate. What would be the Takanas Chazal over here? Over here, you would want to say, well, if an Eina Yehudi lit a nair for a chayla, we're not going to let you get hana from that nair, because if we allow you to get hana from the nair that an Eina Yehudi lit for a chayla, you might ask the Eina Yehudi to light a nair for a chayla. So what? You are allowed to ask an Eina Yehudi to light an air for a chayla. So again, over here, there's no problem of getting hana from the nair. Okay, now, how about if an Eina Yehudi lit an air, and we have a question? Who did he light the nair for? So, for example, the case of the Mechaber was, what if there's a gathering of people? There are several people sitting together. There are Yehudim and Einam Yehudim. And one of the Einam Yehudim went ahead and lit an air. Who did he do it for? Did he do it for himself? Did he do it for the Einam Yehudim? Did he do it for the Yehudi? If he did it for the Yisraelim, then that ner is Asr Bahana. If he did it for the Einam Yehudim, then it's Mutter Bahana. How do we decide? The Mechaber told us, we go Basarayv. If the majority of the group are Einam Yehudim, then we have the right to assume that the ner was lit for the benefit primarily of the Einam Yehudim, and now you're allowed to be mishtamish la'ar haner. If, on the other hand, the majority of the group are Yisraelim, Yehudim, then we have to assume that it was lit on behalf of the Yisraelim, in which case it's going to become awesome. Okay. Then the Mechaber went ahead and qualified this a little bit. Mechaber said, what if we have a haichacha? We have something that's showing us that the Eina Yehudi lit the ner either for himself or for another Eina Yehudi. What's an example of that? Well, let's say you have a group of 10 people, you have 8 Yisraelim, and you have 2 Einam Yehudim, and they're sitting in the dark. And the Eina Yehudi grabs a ner, lights it, takes out a book, and starts reading right away. So over here, it's very clear that he lit the ner for himself. He lit the ner and literally started using it right away. Said the Mechaber, in such a case, the ner becomes mutter, because this is a haichacha, this is a proof, a raya, that he lit the ner for himself. And since he lit the ner for himself, now the ner is mutter. The Mishnah Berurah said, what if we see that the Eina Yehudi lit the ner both for himself and for Yisrael? So what would a case of that be? Well, the Eina Yehudi comes in with a book, and he wants to sit down and he wants to read a book. It's dark in the room. He's holding a ner. Meantime, there's a Yisrael sitting over there with a chumash, and the Eina Yehudi turns to the Yisrael and says, I see you also need a light. Don't worry. I know it's your Sabbath. I'm going to light a light. We can both read. Well, now it seems very clear that he lit the ner both for himself and for the Yisrael. The Mishnah Berurah brought down a Magen Avram, and he ruled like the Magen Avram that in such a case the ner would be aser. The Aruch HaShulchan seems to say not that way. The Aruch HaShulchan seems to say that in such a case the ner would be mutter, because that's considered that he lit it primarily for himself. Okay, and then we had, in the beginning of Sif Gimel here on Nun Vav Amud Beis, we had a very interesting case. What if somebody turns to his Eino Yehudi Eved or Shifcha, and he says, listen, I need you to come out with me to the back, to the shed, to get some extra folding tables from the shed. It's dark outside. So the Eino Yehudi goes ahead, and he grabs an air, he lights an air, so that they could walk together out to the backyard. Now, in this case, the Yisrael and the Eino Yehudi are walking together, and the Eino Yehudi lit an air. How do we look at this? Is this called that the Eino Yehudi lit an air for himself, because he's afraid that he's going to trip, and he's going outside to the shed? Is this called that he lit an air on behalf of both of them? He lit an air for himself and for his master, who asked him, his employer, who asked him to come out to the shed? Says the Mechaber, no. This is called that he lit the ner for the Yisrael. He's using the ner also. So the Mechaber explained. The Mechaber said, in this case, why are they going out to the shed? They're going out to the shed for the employer. The employer is the one who said, let's go out to the shed. So the entire enterprise over here is for the employer. And at the same time, there's another factor. And the Yid is going with him. So the Yid is being nene from the guf of the ner. He's being directly nene from the ner. In that case, said the Mechaber, that's called that the Eino Yehudi lit it for the Yisrael. He's going to the backyard for the Yisrael. The whole thing over here is only for the Yisrael. And the Yisrael is coming with him and getting hana from the ner. That's called lighting it for the Yisrael. Said the Mishnah Berurah, what if the employer would have told his Eino Yehudi employee, do me a favor, go to the backyard to the shed and get some extra chairs. And then the Eino Yehudi lights the ner and goes out to the back, but the Yid doesn't go with him? That's called he lit it for himself. Even though, again, over here, the whole enterprise is only for the Yid, the Eino Yehudi employee is only going out to the backyard for his Yiddish employer, but it doesn't matter. Over here, since he's going alone, and the Yiddish employer is not going with him, that's called that he lit it for himself, and now it would be mutter. Okay, against that backdrop, we now go to the Haggadah, to the words of the Ramah, who brings up a very interesting case, but within that case, we're going to learn a very, very important rule that pertains to all these halachas. Says the Ramah, 3 lines off the bottom, Nun Vav Amud Beis Haggadah. Umutter loymar le'eino Yehudi, you're allowed to say to an Eino Yehudi, leilech imoi, to go together with you, lital ner doluk kvar. In this case, again, you're asking your Eino Yehudi employee, come with me out to the shed in the backyard to get some folding chairs. Grab the ner. Over here, you have a ner that's already burning. You have an oil lamp that's lit. You're not asking him to light anything. It's already lit. What are you asking him to do? Take it and carry it with us to the backyard. Says the Ramah, you're allowed to ask the Eino Yehudi to carry the ner. Hayil ve'enoi oise rak tiltul haner ba'alma. Why? Because in this case, what are you asking the Eino Yehudi to do? What you're asking him to do is to be over on an Isser Muktzah. Now, be over. He's an Eino Yehudi. But you're asking him to perform tiltul of Muktzah. The ner is Muktzah. You're asking him to go do an Issa D'Rabbanan of Muktzah, to go carry the ner. Says the Ramah, you're allowed to ask him to do that. Why? Let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah is Chav Tes. Loymar le'eino Yehudi. First off, right away, the Chavetz Chaim says, Ve'ein lahater ela levnei Torah. This heter should only be given to Bnei Torah who have an understanding of halacha. Why? Dilma asi lemisrach ulahakal yoser. If we're going to make a blanket heter over here, and we're going to say that you could always ask an Eino Yehudi to go handle things that are muktzah, it's going to get out of hand. You can only give this heter to a Ben Torah who could understand what goes into this heter, what lies behind it. Says the Mishnah Berurah Lamed, Leilech imoy. You're asking the Eino Yehudi to come with you out to the backyard to get the folding chairs, and you're asking him to carry a ner with him. Kigoin, for example, says the Chavetz Chaim, Sheroitze sheyelech imay limshach yayin min hamartef. You're asking the Ein Yehudi to come with you downstairs to the wine cellar. And you're asking him to grab an air and take an air downstairs. Or to get bread from the pantry. Ukahai gavno, or any such similar case. Says the Mishnah Berurah a very important thing. First of all, ve'ein chilik beiner shel shava v'chelev, oy shel shemen. In regard to this halacha, there's no difference if we're talking about some type of a candle that has a solid fuel or an oil lamp that has a liquid fuel. Why would you think that there is a difference? Let's see. Bener shel shemen, when you're dealing with an oil lamp, nochein lahachmir, it would be proper to be machmir, shaloi loymar le'ein Yehudi sheyelech imay b'merutza. Don't ask the Ein Yehudi to run. Why? Ki efshir shalo yiskarev al yidei hashemen al yidei zeh hashemen lepsila or yisrachik. If the Ein Yehudi is going to carry the oil lamp that has a liquid fuel and he's going to run, he's going to be shaking the oil in the lamp around. As he shakes it around, either the oil is going to go closer to the tip of the wick, and that's going to make the fire burn brighter. That would be mavir. That's making a bigger fire. Or the oil is going to slosh away from the tip of the nair, and it's going to dim. That would be kibui. So if you're asking the Ein Yehudi to run, you're putting him in a position where he is going, it's like a psik reisha, he is going to end up doing mavir or kibui. That you should not ask him to do. If the Yid would do it, that would be an Isser. It would be a problem of Maver or Kibui. Al Kain Ein Loy Marzella Ein Yehudi. Therefore, you should not ask the Ein Yehudi to do this. Now, the problem with this Mishnah Berurah over here, Ois Katan Lamed, is that we can't truly understand it until we do Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Lamed Aleph. So I'm not even going to explain Ois Katan Lamed yet. We're going to go straight into Ois Katan Lamed Aleph. Now, Ois Katan Lamed Aleph, the Ramah just said, what is this heter of the Ramah? The heter that the Ramah is telling you is, you want to go down to the wine cellar and it's dark down there, you could ask the Ein Yehudi, do me a favor, grab an air that's already lit. Grab an air and bring it together with us downstairs to the wine cellar. The Ramah says, why is this mutter? Because what are you asking him to do? All you're asking him to do is to handle muktzah. That's the only thing that you're asking him to do. And that's okay. You can ask him to handle muktzah. Now let's pause here for a second. Why is that okay? If we look at it from 30,000 feet, what are you doing? You're doing Amira La'akum on a Derabanan. You're asking an Ein Yehudi, you're instructing him to do something which is an Issa Derabanan on Shabbos. Muktzah is an Issa Derabanan. Now, is Amira La'akum on a Derabanan mutter? No, it's not. Amira La'akum on a Derabanan is mutter b'mokeh mitzvah. But Amira La'akum on a Derabanan to get some bread from downstairs, that's not mutter. Now you'll tell me, what if you need it for Yesud Shabbos? I'm not going there. So that's why I like the example, in a way, better of the folding chairs. I mean, like this, it's not a makkah mitzvah. So it's Amir Lakum and a Derabanan. Amir Lakum and a Derabanan is not mutter. So that's not the source of the Ramah's heter here. That's not the heter. There's a different heter. What's the heter? Let's see Mishnah Berurah's Katan Lamed Aleph. Ba'alma. The Ramah said the reason this is mutter is because all you're asking him to do is tiltal ba'alma. Explains the Mishnah Berurah. What the Ramah wants to say is like this. Hoyel duhu rak iser muktzah, since the only problem over here is in iser muktzah, umuktzah shari al yidei tiltal min hatzad. There are ways that a Yisrael is allowed to handle muktzah. One of them is tiltal min hatzad. Now, it's funny that the Mishnah Berurah mentions tiltal min hatzad because the example that he's going to give is not tiltal min hatzad. Tiltal min hatzad means indirect movement. So an example of tiltal min hatzad would be if you have muktzah on a bed and it's laying on top of the blanket and you take the blanket and you move the blanket, so you are indirectly handling the muktzah. Now, there are times that tiltal min hatzad is mutter by muktzah. So says the Chavetz Chaim like this. Hoyel duhu rakis or muktzah. Over here, the only thing you're asking the Ein Yehudi to do is to handle muktzah. Umuktzah shari al yidei tiltal min hatzad. Now, sometimes it's a mutter for Yisrael to handle muktzah. Kamei shekasa b'siman shinyon aleph. Well, Sif Ches will get there, Be'ez Hashem Yisparach. Therefore, says the Chavetz Chaim, V'kevan the iboy Yisrael shokale ba'atzmai al yidei tiltel min atzad. Since, let's say the Ein Yehudi wasn't here, and let's say the Yisrael wants to go downstairs to the wine cellar by himself, and he doesn't have an Ein Yehudi to take the ner, so he wants to take the ner by himself. There are ways that he could take the ner by himself. Kigoin, for example, ba'achoy yodov. He could pick up the ner using the back of his hands. So he'll pick up the ner like this. Now that's not tiltel min atzad. That's what's called kelacher yad. He's doing it in an abnormal way. He's doing it shaloi kederech. That's mutter. You're allowed to handle muktzah in many cases if you're handling it kelacher yad. Or, says the Mishnah Berurah, oy bein atzile yodov. Or he'll go ahead and he'll grab it using his elbows or his forearms, and he'll grab the ner like that. Again, that's kelacher yad. So says the Chavetz Chaim, there are ways that the Yisrael could accomplish the very task that he's asking the Ein Yehudi to do, ba'ofen heter. The Yisrael himself could carry the ner if he does it kelacher yad. Therefore, says the Mishnah Berurah, kishemevi Ein Yehudi be'isura, to ask the Ein Yehudi to do it, even though he's going to do it ba'ofen iser, les lanba. That's okay. This is a major rule in Amir al-Akum. Over here, what the Mishnah Berurah is saying is, there's an Isser of Amir al-Akum. There's an Isser of Amir al-Akum even on the Rabbanan. But sometimes there's a task that you want to ask an Ein Yehudi to perform, and it could be performed ba'ofen heter, in a way that's mutter, or ba'ofen iser, in a way that's aser. I'll give you a classic example. Washing dishes. Washing dishes could be done ba'ofen heter on Shabbos. You could wash dishes with your hand. You could use, according to some poskim, you could use liquid soap. According to other poskim, maybe very diluted liquid soap. Or you could wash dishes without any soap. Right? You could clean a dish without soap, Rabbi Isai. So, and you use cold water. And you don't use a sponge. You do it with your hands. So there are ways to wash dishes on Shabbos ba'ofen heter. Therefore, you're allowed to ask the Ein Yehudi to wash the dishes. Now, she will wash the dishes with hot water and soap and a sponge. But you know what? I didn't ask her to do that. I asked her to wash dishes. And dishes could be washed ba'ofen heter. Since it can be done ba'ofen heter, I could ask her to do it. Now, if she does it ba'ofen iser, not my problem. That's the source of the heter over here. You're asking the Ein Yehudi to carry a ner down to the wine cellar. Now, you could carry the ner down to the wine cellar ba'ofen heter. You could carry it kelacher yad. Therefore, you could ask the Ein Yehudi to carry the ner, and the Ein Yehudi, is going to carry the ner ba'ofen iser. He's going to hold it directly, not kelacher yad. That's okay. That's not your problem. Now, that brings us back to Ois Katan Lamed. This is why in Ois Katan Lamed, the Mishnah Berurah says that you should not ask the Ein Yehudi to run. The reason you shouldn't ask the Ein Yehudi to run is because there's no way for you to run with the ner ba'ofen heter. Because should you pick up the ner kelacher yad and run with the ner, you're going to cause the oil either to flow to the wick or away from the wick. And then you're going to be over either on mavir or on mechabe. And those are isurei daraisa. So there's no way for you to run with the ner ba'ofen heter. That's why you can't ask the Ein Yehudi to run with the ner. That's what the Mishnah Berurah means in Ois Katan Lamed. Okay. Continuing here, Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Lamed Aleph says the Mishnah Berurah v'ayin lekamon Siman Reish Ayin Tes. He tells us, take a look weiter in Siman Reish Ayin Tes b'magen Avram Siv Katan Tes. The letaltel is hapsila al yedei ha'ein Yehudi kedei shelo yiganev or shelo yipased aser. The Magen Avram says an interesting thing. He says, what if you have an oil lamp and it goes out? Now, we're talking about a day and age where people mamish lived in poverty, and the wick of an oil lamp was a valuable commodity. And by the way, this doesn't have to be like the tiny little wick that we're talking about from your Chanukah neiros. If you have a substantial lamp and it has a substantial wick, that wick is a valuable commodity. Now, what if you have a ner and the ner has already gone out? So now you have a ner, and sitting there is the extinguished wick. Now you want to ask the Ein Yehudi, do me a favor, take the wick out and put it away. Why? Either because you're afraid somebody might steal the wick, or if the wick is sitting over there, somehow it might get ruined. So you want him to take out the wick and put the wick in a protected place. The Magen Avraham says you're not allowed to do that. Now again, here too we have a case where what are you asking the Ein Yehudi to do? You're asking him to be metaltal muktzah. Now we just said that you're allowed to ask an Ein Yehudi to be metaltal muktzah, since there's a way that you yourself could do it. So how come over here you can't ask him to take out the wick? Explains the Mishnah Berurah over here, it's different. And here you see why the Mishnah Berurah told us earlier, you can only give this heter to B'nai Torah. Because this is not a heter that you could just easily apply to any case. Says the Mishnah Berurah, the Magen Avraham's case over there is also. Why? V'rak tiltul kishu tzarich loy gufa v'chanal b'sif cotton lamed oy kishu tzarich l'mekayimay muter v'chein kasa b'derech hachayim. What the Chavetz Chaim is saying is like this. Over here, by the case of handling the ner, why are you asking the Ein Yehudi to carry a ner? You're asking the Ein Yehudi to carry the ner because you need the light of the ner. You need the ner. That you're allowed to ask the Ein Yehudi to do, since you yourself would be mutter to do it. But now in the Magen Avraham's case, you want to ask the Ein Yehudi to take the extinguished wick out of the ner and put it away. Would you be allowed to do that ba'ofen heter? Is there a way for you to do that ba'ofen heter? So you're going to say to yourself, well, maybe I could go to the ner and I could pull the wick out klachayad. You wouldn't be allowed to do that. You know why? Because what type of muktzah is an extinguished wick? An extinguished wick, a wick is not a keli. It's not considered a utensil. A wick is comparable to eitzim va'avonim, sticks and stones. You go out to your backyard on Shabbos and you have sticks and stones on the ground, you're not allowed to pick them up. Why? They're called muktzah machmas gufay. They are inherently muktzah. They inherently have no use on Shabbos. They're inherently muktzah. That's a very stringent form of muktzah. You are not allowed to handle something that's muktzah machmas gufay only under very strict conditions. You're not allowed to handle it in order to protect it and put it away. You're not allowed to handle... You see, when you want to handle it to protect it, to put it away, you're not handling it because you have a need for it now. You don't even have a need for the place that it's occupying. It's not even tzarech b'kaimai. It's not like you have muktzah on a chair and you need the chair. Over here, you want to handle it in order to protect it. You're not allowed to do that, kalacher yad, on Shabbos by muktzah machmas gufay. So explains the Mishnah Berurah, the underpinning of that Magen Avraham is you can't ask the Ein Yehudi to take out the extinguished wick and put it away, because even though all you're asking him to do is to handle muktzah, but that's a case where you yourself have no way to do it b'ofen heter. In our case, there's a way that you could carry the ner b'ofen heter. Therefore, you could ask him to do it, even though he's going to do it b'ofen iser. But to go ask him to handle the wick, that is no way for you to do ba'ofen heter. You're not allowed to handle the wick klacher yad in order to protect it. And therefore you can't ask the Ein Yehudi himself to do it. Okay, the truth is, you look, it's already almost a half hour. But the truth is that we've gotten through the most complex part of today's share. Let's go weiter. Without further ado, the bottom line in the Shulchan Aruch Hanun Vav Amud Beis Sif Dalet says the Mechaber another very important rule in these halachas. We said earlier, okay, again, let's go back to basics. If an Ein Yehudi lights a ner for you, you're not allowed to get any hana from that ner. No Yisrael is allowed to get hana from that ner. Having said that, we saw a very interesting heter in Sif Aleph in the Ramah on the top of Nun Vav Amud Aleph. What was that? Let's say an Ein Yehudi comes into your house, and of his own volition, he goes ahead and he lights an ner for you. He sees you sitting in the dark. He says, oh, you're sitting in the dark because of your Sabbath. I'll light you an ner. And he goes ahead and he lights you an ner. You didn't ask him to light the ner. He went ahead and he lit an ner. Now, once there's a lit ner in your house, you are going to get hana from that ner. So do Chazal tell you you have to leave the house? Get out of the house because you're not allowed to have hana from the ner? Said the Rama, no, they were makel. Chazal were makel. And they said, we're not going to throw you out of your house because an Ein Yehudi lit a ner in the house. Having said that, what is the halacha? The halacha is that passively, you're allowed to get hana from that ner. In other words, whatever hana you're going to get from that ner against your will, whatever hana you're going to get bal karchai, you're allowed to get that hana. Are you allowed to be mishtamesh la'oiroi? Are you allowed to actively go use the ner? Could you say, Baruch Hashem, now I have a ner. Now I could read the Ami magazine. No, you can't do that. Because then, that's not the heter that Chazal gave you. Chazal said, passively, whatever I know you're going to get, we're not going to throw you out of your house. But you're not allowed to be mishtamish la'oiroi. We saw in the Mishnah Berurah said, certainly, anything that you would have not been able to do without that ner, you're not now allowed to go do. That you can't do. That's called being mishtamish la'oiroi lahedya. That you can't do. Now, the Mechaber talks about a little, we're going to tweak the case a little. Says the Mechaber like this. Im yesh ner bebeis Yisrael. Let's say a Yid does have some light in his house. He's not sitting in the pitch black. He's sitting in the room, and there's only one ner burning. So it's a little bit dark in the room. But he has a ner. Im yesh ner bebeis Yisrael. Uba ein Yehudi, and now a Yid comes, v'hidlik ner acher. He says, it's a little dark in here. So he lights a second ner for you. Oh, he's lighting a second ner for you. He's not turning the room from dark to light. What he's doing is he's making an improvement. There already was light that I could use. Now he's improving it. It was a little dim. Now he's brightening the room up. Oh, says the Mechaber in that case, mutter lehishtamesh la'oiroi, you're allowed to actively use the second ner that the guy lit, ba'oid ner rishon doilek, so long as the first ner is still burning. You hear that? Since you already had a ner, so now the ner that the guy lit on your behalf is only making an improvement to the situation. You're allowed to enjoy that improvement, even lahedya, as long as the first ner is still burning. So that means like this. You had a ner burning in your dining room. Now, you could sit at your favorite seat at the dining room table, and you could be Marvis Sedra if you do this. You could eke out the words if you go very close to the page, and, you'll manage. You could be Marvis Sedra. Now, the Ein Yehudi came, and he lit a second ner on your table, very close to your seat. Now you could turn around, and you could be mishtamish la'oiroi. You could turn around, and you could say, now I'm going to enjoy the second ner that the Ein Yehudi lit, and I'm going to be Marvis Sedra like this. So now it's not like the heter that we saw before, that we're not going to throw you out of your house, but you're not allowed to be mishtamish la'oiroi. Over here, you're allowed to be mishtamish la'oiroi because what the guy did was he made an improvement. It's not, I don't know what word to use. I'm searching for the English word. Maybe the best word to use is absolute. It's not an absolute creation from his malacha. It's not that before it was dark and now it's light. No, before it was dim. Now it's bright. That's an improvement. I'm allowed to enjoy the improvement that the Ein Yehudi did. But once my first light goes out, now I'm no longer enjoying the improvement. Now I'm enjoying only the light that he made. That I can't do. So that's why the Mechaber says, as long as your original light is burning, you could enjoy his second light. Once your original light goes out, you can no longer use the second light. The other thing I want to throw in right away is, even in this case, you're not allowed to do anything that would have been impossible for you to do without the guy's second light. So, if it would be a case where it would be impossible for you to read by your original light, and now the only reason you could read is because of the second light, then you can't read by the second light, because that again would be an absolute benefit, not just an improvement. Okay, let's see the Mishnah Berurah here. Ois kat lamed beis mutter. What the Mechaber wants to say over here is After ata al yedei haner hazeh shehidlik b'shvil Yisrael niskadla or yoiser, even though the Ein Yehudi is making a distinct improvement, he's making the room brighter, he's adding additional light, afilu hachi mutter, it's still mutter to use his light. Umayri, but we're talking about a case, kishahaya yochal mitchila b'makam hazeh al kol panim lehanis ktsas la'or haner rishon. This is only true because you would have already been able to do things by the light of your original light. And therefore the guy is only making an improvement. V'lachein shari. That's why it's mutter. Upalavachi aser. Without that, if he's making an absolute, not improvement, but a change in the circumstances, there was no light before it was dark and now it's light, that would be aser. Of course, we saw earlier that to do Amir La'akab and ask the Ein Yehudi to light a ner, that would always be aser. Ice-cut lam and gimel. You could use the guy's second additional light so long as you have your original light. Aval. But once your original light goes out, now you can't use his light anymore. Aval. V'chein. Similarly. If there was a nice warming fire lit, so you filled up your wood-burning stove on Erev Shabbos and you made a beautiful warming fire. Uba Ein Yehudi, and now an Ein Yehudi comes, v'hoisif eitzim b'Shabbos, and he adds wood into the wood-burning stove on Shabbos, b'shvil Yisrael, on behalf of the Yid. Once the original wood that you put in on Erev Shabbos burns up, you're no longer allowed to use the fire. Because now, the only reason you have heat is because of the wood that the Ein Yehudi put in, the fire that he made. So now you're not allowed to use it. But before your wood burns up, you're allowed to enjoy his wood, because he's only making an improvement. He's adding wood, he's adding some fire. That is okay, le'es hatzorech. Okay, now we go weiter in the Mechaber's second line down near the beginning of the line. V'chein similarly says the Mechaber, Im nosan shemen baner hadoilik. Let's say you have an oil lamp that you lit on Erev Shabbos. Now an oil lamp only holds a certain amount of oil. Now the Ein Yehudi came on Shabbos and he added oil. V'chein, Im nosan shemen baner hadoilik. If the Ein Yehudi added oil to a burning lamp, mutter lihishtamish, you're allowed to use the light of that lamp ad kidei sheyichla hashemen shahaya boy kvar, until the original oil gets burnt up. V'achakach oser. Once your original oil gets burnt up, you're not allowed to use the ner anymore, because now you're using the oil that he added for you be'isser on Shabbos. Says the Mishnah Berurah, mutter. After al yedei nesidas Hashem in the Tosef ha'or. Now Mishnah Berurah brings up an interesting point. He says, you got to realize, when the Ein Yehudi comes in the middle of Shabbos and he adds oil to the lamp, he's not only extending the life of the lamp, he's also making the ner burn brighter. Because the assumption is that when a ner is fuller of oil, the oil travels up the wick better and it makes a brighter flame. So, l'chayra, the minute after the Ein Yehudi adds oil to the ner, you're being nene from a brighter flame that he made. Still, that's okay, says the Mechaber. After Yidei Nesinas Hashem in the Tosef ha'or, v'cheinim also shar tikun b'haner b'shvil Yisrael shal Yidei zeni Tosef ha'or, or anything else that the Ein Yehudi did to improve the light of the ner. Maybe he clipped off the little carbonized tip on the wick, so he did something to improve it. You're allowed to use that, even as long as your ner would still be burning. After Bavada Isser Gomer Lechatchila Letzavis Leini Yehudi Lazeh, certainly it would be an Isser Gomer of Amir La'akum. You wouldn't be allowed to ask the Ein Yehudi to do this. Afilu Hachi Mutter Lehishtamish La'oiroi, but if he does it, you're allowed to get hana from the light. Kevin the Balav Hachi Hayayacham Etchila Ktsas Lehishtamish La'oiroi. Again, you had a burning ner. Now he came and he clipped off the tip of the wick, and now it's burning brighter. But he only made an improvement. And therefore, you're allowed to use his improvement as long as your original light is still there. Let's go to the Ramah 3 lines down. Says the Ramah Hagah. Very interesting Ramah here. Umutter limchais be'eni Yehudi shabal hadlik ner oy lahoisiv shemen. Very interesting Ramah. It's going to catch you by surprise. You won't understand why the Ramah said it until you see the Mishnah Berurah. The Ramah is telling you should know. If a Yehudi comes to your house and he goes to light an air, or he goes to add oil to an air, you're allowed to tell him not to. Okay? Chiddush? I mean, we learned earlier that you have to object. Now the Ramah is telling me you should know it's mutter to object. He explains the Mishnah Berurah's Katlam and hey, mutter. You might have thought that there was room to be makmer and say that you're not allowed to say a word. You're not allowed to object to what he's doing. Why would you think such a thing? We know that there's an Isser of Shabbos of daber davar. You're not allowed on Shabbos to talk about things that are also to do on Shabbos. So you might think this has to do with Isurei Shabbos. Maybe I'm not allowed to talk about lighting an air, not lighting an air. Kamash on the Ramah, no, you are allowed to. You're allowed limchais to protest, to object. Now, this is also a very important Mishnah Berurah over here. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Umikevan de michabai. If the Eini Yehudi comes to do malacha in your house, so the Eini Yehudi comes to light an air in your house for your benefit, and you protest, you object, you tell him, no, don't do it. That's the halacha. You're mechuyev to tell him not to do it. You're sitting in the dark, the Eini Yehudi comes, he says, oh, it's your Sabbath, you're sitting here in the dark, I'll light an air for you. You have to strenuously object, we learned. You have to tell him, no, don't do it. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Umikeva de michabai, once you object, and you let him know clearly that you do not want him to do this malacha on your behalf on Shabbos, if the guy now goes ahead and does the malacha, now it's called that he did it for himself, not for you. Umutter lehishtamesh la'oiroi. And now you're allowed to use the light. Remember what we learned earlier. If the Eini Yehudi lights the light for you or for another Yisrael, it's usher. If he lights it for himself, it's mutter. If the Eini Yehudi comes to light a light for you because you're sitting in the dark and you say, no, don't do it. And he goes ahead and he does it off on Pikain, that's called he did it for himself. Because you showed very clearly you didn't want him to do it. So why did he do it? He did it for his own purposes. Now it's mutter. The Chalzek is shalo yarim b'mechaasai, but he brings down from the Magen Avraham. But there's no cheating. There's no wink. There's no, don't do it. You know what I mean? No, it has to be that you really object. Don't do it. And he does it anyway, then it's mutter. Oiskat lam zayin lahadlik, you could object and tell him you don't want him to light the ner. Dafka kisha ner shel Eini Yehudi, this is true when the ner belongs to the Eini Yehudi. Aval kisha ner shel Yisrael, when the Ramah says it's a mutter to object. The Ramah is talking about a case where the lamp is actually owned by the Eini Yehudi. Aval kisha ner shel Yisrael. But if the Eini Yehudi is coming to light a lamp that's owned by the Yid, you must object. It's not only mutter to object, you must object. Okay, let's go a little bit right here. Says the Mechaber 3 lines off the bottom Sif Hey. Ba'arotzais karois, in the very cold regions, mutter le'eini Yehudi lasis medura b'shvel haktanim. It is mutter to have an Eini Yehudi light a warming fire for young children, for minor children. Says the Mishnah Berurah's Katlam Ches lasis medura v'hu adin lahasik taner beis hachorif, or to light the furnace in the winter room. That's the room where you sit during the winter, where you have a nice big fire to make it nice and cozy and warm. Again, let's go into the Mechaber. So in the cold regions during the winter, it's a mutter to have the Eini Yehudi do this. Let's remember that we consider the Ketanim to be Cholim. So this is Amir La'akum. It's interesting. It's Amir La'akum on a Daraisa, right? Lighting an air is a Daraisa. It's Amir La'akum on a Daraisa but it's b'shvil a cotton. A cotton is considered like a chayla. Over there's no isser of Amir Lakum. Amir Lakum is only the Rabbanan. The Chachamim weren't Maimid Divreim b'makim chayli. So Amir Lakum over here for the Ketanim would be mutter. And, says the Mechaber, once the Ein Yehudi lights that Medura, umutarin hagedolim lehischamim boy. Now even the adults are allowed to get the warmth of that fire. That goes with what we learned earlier in Sif Aleph in this Siman. Once the Ein Yehudi does the malacha for a chayla, he didn't do it for you, he did it for a chayla. Now anybody is allowed to get hana from it. Why? Because there's no room for gzera. What would the gzera be? You're not allowed to get hana from malacha that an Ein Yehudi did for a chayla, because you might ask him to do malacha for a chayla. You're allowed to ask him to do malacha for a chayla. That's why this is mutter. Continues the Mechaber and he says this halacha is true. Va'afilu b'shvel hagedolim mutter im hakar gadol. If it's exceptionally cold, you're allowed to ask an Ein Yehudi to make a warming fire or to put on the heat, even for adults, not only for children. Sha'akol chaylim eitzel hakar, because everybody is considered a chayla when it comes to cold weather. But, says the Mechaber, not like those who stretch this heter and they apply it even to cases where it is not exceptionally cold. Let's see if we could finish out the Siman over here. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Kat Lamches, Lasais Medura, V'Hod Lasik Tana B'Sachayriv. We did that already. Oiskat Lamites, Umutarin Agdoilim. Even the adults are allowed to benefit from this warming fire. It's saying Loimar. What the Mechaber is saying is, Kevin do Ikar Nasa B'Shvel Aktanim. Since the malacha was done by the Ein Yehudi primarily on behalf of the Ktanim, so therefore the Gdoilim are allowed to use it too. The Chanal B'Sif Aleph, like we already learned at Sif Aleph. Avalim Nasa B'Shvel Shneim B'Yachad. How about if the Ein Yehudi did it for the adult and the children? The Aser, then the Shulchan Aruch paskins later on that it would be Aser for the Gdolim to benefit from the fire. Oiskat Mem, Mutter. You're allowed to have the Ein Yehudi light the fire if it's exceptionally cold, even for the adults. What the Mechaber means to say here is, when it's exceptionally cold, it's mutter lehedya. You're allowed to go do Amir La'akum and ask an Ein Yehudi light the fire for the adults when it's exceptionally cold. If it's very cold, the balav hachi. If it's not exceptionally cold, then the adults shouldn't be suffering so much that it should be mutter. Everybody is considered an ill individual when it comes to cold. Nevertheless, to ask the Ein Yehudi to light the fire late Shabbos afternoon so that it should be warm on Motzei Shabbos, 100% that's Aser. If the home was already warmed up Shabbos morning, so don't tell me that Shabbos afternoon it got so cold that you need to go to do it now. No, you're really doing it for Motzei Shabbos, and that's Aser. Even though the house cooled down, that's not a level of cold that we say Akol Chayli Eitzel Akol. And therefore, if the Ein Yehudi would come to light the furnace, you would have to object and tell him he can't do it until after the Zman Oy Shabbos, until after Tzeisik HaChavim. Nevertheless, says the Chavetz Chaim, Hakol Tola Lifi Akar or Lifi Beis HaChayrif. Of course, you have this. The halacha over here is situational. It depends exactly how cold it is, etc., etc. Everybody is considered an ill individual when it comes to cold weather. If you think you're going to be in such a situation where you're going to need the Ein Yehudi to light the fire on Shabbos because it's exceptionally cold, you have to make sure to have the coals and everything prepared for him. Because they're muktzah, you're not allowed to handle them on Shabbos. So make sure you have them ready. The Mechaber said, don't act like those individuals who act very kulidik over here, and they go ahead and they ask the Ein Yehudi to make a fire even when it's not very cold. But the Chavetz Chaim says, if you see people doing that, you shouldn't object. The mutav sheyushayyin value mezidin. They're not going to listen to you. And then if you tell them and they don't listen, they're going to be considered amazed. Better leave them as a shoygig. Nevertheless, you should not put yourself in a situation where you mamish have to do amir la'akum and instruct the Ein Yehudi outright to go ahead and do the malacha for you on Shabbos. Ella, what should you do? Yiktevu yimay bekablanus. Make him a kablan. What you should do is you should hire an Ein Yehudi kablan furnace lighter. Sheyasik loy kol yom isakayr if beishi car. I'll pay you $5 every time it's cold and you come into my house to light a fire. Oh, now you turned him into a kablan. Now there's no amir alakum. Va'az afim Ein Yehudi yasik yishena kar gadol efshir to have a like kilo asamidaitay ve'in sark lotzis mi beisay. Now, even if it's not so cold, if he comes ahead and he does it, okay, he's a kablan. So you're not mechuyev to object and throw him out. Sif cotton yud gimel. Okay, so Baruch Hashem, we've come to the end of Siman Reish Ayin Vav over here. Again, I want to caution everybody. These halachas of Amir La'akum, and these halachas of when an Ein Yehudi does malacha on your behalf, when are you allowed to get hana from that malacha and when are you not? They're very, very, very complex, very multi-layered, and very nuanced. I've given you the basics over here. And you need to be cognizant of the rules, but the most important thing is be cognizant that you have a shaila. And if you have a shaila halacha lamaisa, go ask your Rav for a psak based on your specific case. Thank you so much for joining me for Liman HaTorah. The source of Liman HaTorah should be Megan against Klal Yisrael. The Rosh Hashem should send Yeshua Sefuas Parnasa Jedukim to all the need. We should be zoichet to see the Bias Kal Tzedek. B'mher v'yameinu amen. Be well.